Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. My guests once again for this episode are Winkle Giulioni and Beverly Kaye, both of whom are celebrated authors, speakers, and respected thought leaders in the field of career development. If you joined us for our last episode, you know we've already begun unpacking the big ideas and the key takeaways from their latest edition of their internationally best-selling book, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. But there's so much more to explore. So in today's episode, Julie and Bev are going to take us even deeper into their framework for meaningful career development. We'll be discussing why fostering foresight is a game changer for employees who value their career growth and how staying agile is truly the secret sauce for sustainable success. And here's something that might surprise you. Development activities should not be confined just to the 3 E's, which are education, exposure, and experience. Julie and Bev will share how you can expand beyond these boundaries to truly nurture your team's potential. Plus, we'll mention some practical ways that you could be more deliberate and effective in supporting the career development of your remote and hybrid employees. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. So why don't we move to the next piece of this career conversation, talking about the foresight part of the conversation, to open up an employee to a broader world, the future, to make them more responsible for their career development and to be scanning, right? To have that ESP, the ever scanning and pondering, so they can have on their radar screens what they need to, those external challenges, as well as the internal challenges, so they're ready to pivot or move in those directions in a timely manner.
Yeah. So we were talking about hindsight earlier. So that's the backward and inward look. So if that's what hindsight is, then foresight is the outward and forward look. And what's going on in the organization? What are the needs of the organization? What's going on in our industry, our sector? What's even going on more broadly, environmentally, geopolitically, demographically? The stuff that sounds like it's, sort of strategic planning stuff, but it really is about strategically planning your career, because all of that creates the sandbox within which sustainable, future-proofed careers can operate. And so as employees become aware of the need to, look outward like that, take those things into consideration, they then are able to cross-reference that, of course, with what they love, what they want to do, and they've got something that's more sustainable in terms of a career to be able to plan toward.
And, a homework assignment I've given back in the days when we were live that I particularly loved is I'd say to a group who I knew I was going to see the next day, come in with a headline from anything you read that excites you, that scares you, that worries you, and just share that headline. And that is great grist for the mill of calling people's attentions to what's going on now. Easy to do, too.
And all of this is building on your agility, right? And you state that agility is really the secret sauce of sustainable success, leveraging foresight, translating into smart, responsive steps moving forward.
Yep, without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, given how fast the world is moving, given the way, I mean, you think about the role of the AI prompt engineer. A year ago, that wasn't on our radar screen, and today it's one of the hot ones being recruited for. Things are moving so quickly that if all of us aren't nimble, quick, able to make those pivots and be agile, we're going to find ourselves, kind of fossilized in a world that doesn't necessarily need what we're able to give.
Let's talk about that career development as a rock climbing adventure, because I love that metaphor. Rather, because I think a lot of people still look at it as a ascent up some imaginary ladder. It could be laying against the wrong building, but whether it's lattices or jungle gyms you mentioned or squiggly lines, take your pick. but I love the rock climbing metaphor because there's still a lot of wisdom and opportunities for growth to be gleaned from that analogy and from the wall you mentioned.
Julie and I, when we wrote the first edition, went to a rock climbing place. And we brought along my husband, who was our photographer, lying at the bottom, trying to take shots of us. And we learned a lot about you choose your next step, whether it's going to be a giant one that could be scary but would get you further, or an easy one that, would move you a little bit. And we were testing our hypothesis that it's like a rock climbing wall where you do have choices. And all those choices are available to you. It's like, which one dare you try next?
And a couple of things I walked away from that experience. I was very sore. I don't know about you, Bev. That was harder than it looked. But we tried it with belayers, where we were hooked up to harnesses and somebody on the ground literally had our backs. And when I had that kind of support, I was like Peter Pan. I was reaching, I was jumping, I was flying, and I was fearless because somebody had my back. Not unlike in the workplace when I know my boss has my back, I've got that kind of support. They're not going to let me fall. I'm willing to take those risks, bigger risks that will lead to greater growth. But the other thing that really stunned me, and that I talk with groups a lot about, is I found even when I was staying still, depending upon how I chose to orient myself, to Bev's point, is it a stretch? Is my leg way out here and my arm over here and behind my head and whatnot? How I decide to orient myself, I could create an experience of growth without ever moving. I could be building muscle, I could be having a great time, have a good view, and I don't have to go anywhere. And that's something that increasingly, we need to be aware of in the workplace, that we don't have to move to a different role, have a different title, get that promotion. We can bring the growth, as long as we're intentional, right into the role that we occupy.
That's so important. I mean, why do we always think about leaving where we are to get to where we're going instead of looking more closely at where I am and how I could change it just slightly, and I have a whole new experience.
That's a great insight and a different perspective that more people should take. You give a lot of wisdom in that. Top part of this metaphor is you say top doesn't have to be the goal. Not everyone can reach it, nor does everyone want to reach it. Other two pieces of wisdom nuggets that I pulled out of that was there's lots of ways around on a rock wall in your career development, countless paths that are available to get you from point A to point B. And probably the most profound one that I think a lot more leaders should be mindful of, or just individuals in general, is sometimes a step back moves you forward. Getting to your ultimate destination might require some counterintuitive move down initially before you can move upward and forward.
Right. And I see it time and time again where that looks great. There's more dollars in it. There's more of everything in it, a better parking space, whatever it is. I want that. And I get there, and that A is harder than I ever thought. And that A is causing me problems in my home life that I never dreamed it would. Why did I ever do it? And it's where we lose great people, especially technical people who will choose that upward move. And when it's not right, they would rather leave the company completely than admit it.
The other thing I think around this taking a step back is we're starting to honor that in a different way than we did perhaps before the pandemic. I think the events of the last several years, having to look mortality right in the face, trying to reprioritize where work fits within my broader life. I think there are a lot more employees who are willing to do that today, and there's not as much stigma associated with it.
That's great to hear because it definitely is more needed today than it has been in the recent past. And another thing that you mentioned, Julie, in the book is employees need to come to terms with how they personally define career success and recast it as advancement. And they need to let you in on that secret in the way they want you to help and support. Can you unpack that a little bit more? Because that's, to me, is profound if that paradigm shift in their understanding can happen.
Oh, I love that this is recorded too. I can't wait for my family to hear that you think something was profound. This is good. So, yeah, at the end of the day, we each have our own unique definition of what success looks like. And for too long, as leaders, I think there have been just a lot of assumptions that everybody wants to move up the ladder and that sort of thing. And unless we have those conversations that we've been talking about with people, we don't know what those definitions are. And Bev and I, when we wrote the book originally, we asked, what do you want out of a career development conversation more than anything else to, I don't know, hundreds, thousands, I can't remember, of employees. The number one thing they wanted was creative ways to use their skills and talents. Creative ways to use their skills and talents. And who doesn't want that? But managers go into these conversations thinking they want the promotion and they want the, more money and all of that. And so at its core, as individuals, if we can figure out what success looks like and not fall into the habit of just looking upward, up the ladder, because that's what we've always done. We're raised from kids to just kind of think about moving up. If we can, for ourselves, do the reflection that's required to really figure out what relationship do I want with work right now, knowing that it's going to change over time. And if leaders and managers are willing to engage in that conversation, there are probably countless ways that they can collaborate to create the conditions for the kind of engagement, the kind of growth that people are looking for. And then that leads to, of course, the business outcomes that flow from that.
I love when a manager actually says, what's the upside of that upward move? And what is the downside? And just to get someone to articulate, well, gee, it's going to cause me more angst. It's going to get me home even later. It's going to, whatever it is. I don't think we ask enough about the downside.
I agree. And like you mentioned, Julie, promotions are so yesterday. So there's lots of ways to develop and grow that people need to understand. And Bev, but directing this to you, the challenge of growing in place, I find, and I love how you include this in the book, is stripping titles from our thinking and instead focusing on what the employee needs to experience, know, learn, and it's able to do. When we can reframe that development as co-creating these enriching experiences, then we widen their lenses of possibility, allowing them to grow right where they are, correct?
Can you come and deliver these seminars for us, please? Because, man, you got it. And you're right. That's it. It's those definitions that are like ink on our brain that we have to erase and re-ink something more, much more expansive and much wider and deeper than the traditional. I've been trying to say that forever, forever, forever.
I like the way you say that in terms of inking it, because it is these deep grooves that are created from the time we're little kids. When people ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be, I wanted to be an elevator operator, but we'll reserve that for another episode. But then we come to the workplace, and the corporate equivalent of that is, where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? It's all about what we want to be. And that just narrows the conversation. When if we can just focus on, what do people want to do? Talk to me about the nature of the work, how you want to work, what kind of technology, what kind of customers, under what circumstances. If they start talking about the work and the doing, suddenly we're in a position where we can probably find ways to make that happen with greater ease than, I want to be the vice president of XYZ.
Absolutely. Let's get into the development activities because in the past, they've gravitated toward three broad categories, the three E's: education, exposure, and experience. And let's talk about how they're a little bit different now in today's society. And education, it used to be you had to go back for formal education. You went out of the workforce, or it was an inconvenience to try to do that at the same time. But now education resources are available 24/7 for just in time, just for me learning.
At the end of the day, in the middle of the night, you can go take a course if you want to and learn and grow. But I think sometimes we do not recognize an educational experience as what it is. Like, I always want to ask, and what did you learn from that? And I don't think people slow down to even think about that question. What did I learn from that awful experience that just happened? What will I do differently next time? And what will I never do again? That's simple. We should ask our kids those questions too. And what did you learn from that?
We can go through all sorts of experiences. And, Charles, you were talking about really the democratization of learning, the way content is so available. We can learn just about anything we want. We can access or acquire the knowledge, but there's then a bit of a gap between knowing and doing, right? And part of that is the unpacking piece of it and the intention and the application to the real world.
Well, we know that very well here at IMS too. It's just content, great content is no longer the differentiator. It's how you curate it so people get to apply it and the learning gets to stick. Because reading a book or going to a training is just potential knowledge. It's not activated until you apply something. And there's so many opportunities now for individuals to get this knowledge. But you're right, Julie, it's more about how are they going to apply it, be reminded of when to do it, how to fit it in your workflow, and how to connect it in a deeper way. Because with adults, unless they can use it right away and find ways to leverage that wisdom, it's quickly forgotten.
And you've done a marvelous job at IMS, if I may say so, that of really curating and putting together such thoughtful interventions that really do take the content down into the level of here's what I'm going to do with it.
Let's move to the next E, which is around exposure. And the more individuals can be drawn into an employee's career support circle, the better, enabling exposure through mentoring, job shadowing, coaching, networking. These things just amplify the impact of their career development. But I see a trend now happening, maybe in the last few years, where they become more disconnected, especially the virtual employees, the remote workers that are not having these support circles. What can be done really to support them during this time and get them more connected for more exposure within their organization and within their industry?
I love group support groups of every single kind: threesomes, twosomes, fivesomes, cohorts, teaching each other. Here's a mistake I made, and here's what I learned from it. Don't do what I just did. Even a mistake, talking about your mistakes it's too depressing to end your day with that, but it too is a learning. Or, when we had little kids, we'd say, what's one new thing you learned today? Isn't that great to ask an adult? Like, what's one new thing you learned today that you hadn't crossed your mind before? Maybe we need more of those dinner time conversations.
Dinner time and corporate boardroom tables, discussions as well. Um, yeah, for sure. The remote and hybrid employees do face some unique challenges when it comes to being able to develop. And in fact, that's one of the significant changes to the third edition of Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go is we have an entire chapter dedicated to developing at a distance. Because, we learned during COVID and afterward, we learned of the impact of proximity bias, just that natural tendency that those who are closest to us are the ones we think about, who get the assignments and the opportunities and whatnot. and the really devastating impact that that can have on the careers of those who are not proximate, that, out of sight, out of mind tendency. And so we've written a whole chapter about this. And just, the spoiler alert is we did a bunch of interviews with thought leaders in the area and practitioners who were doing this well, because we wanted to amass, this great laundry list of techniques and strategies to make developing at a distance work. And every time Bev and I would have a conversation, with somebody, an interview, we'd get back on the phone and say, well, it was a good conversation, but what'd you get out of it? The common theme was do everything that you're already doing in face-to-face, co-located environments, but do it with greater intention. And that's what the key seems to be, is the intentionality we bring to it.
I love that. And we're going to get more into that here in just a moment. Want to just go over that final E, which is experience. Education and exposure go a long way toward helping employees develop, but experience is frequently the best and most powerful teacher. And key lessons and a lot of learning comes from their experiences. I read some research that stated on the job training and the experience that they are getting is the primary source of their learning 70 to 80% of the time. So how can that be leveraged in this day and age to be more impactful for their career?
I love that you're not defining experience as in the classroom, which is the way we always defined it, in the training room and etc. And experiences happen every second of every day. And managers, I know there's a chapter that Julie and I both love that's, about the clues are out there, the clues for you to ask that next question or question a decision. Are you taking advantage of those kind of nanosecond abilities to say, oh, I could have asked that differently? Or, oh, I stepped on I used to call them freaky buttons. I stepped on her freaky buttons and she freaked, and I am not going to do that again.
Yeah, and the experience piece of it is so broad. As Bev said, everything is an experience around us. And I don't want to sound like a one-trick pony, but going back to intentionality, it's about the intentionality that we bring to that. So that, to the extent that a leader or a manager can look around at the real work that needs to get done, that actually, Bev might be doing something she can do in her sleep. She's bored sick of it. But Charles over here would love to learn a little bit of that, and being able to give Charles the opportunity to do some of that, to take some of that off Bev's plate. A savvy manager is going to find ways to create those opportunities and leverage the invisible development experiences that are floating around all the time. And then, to Bev's point, you set people up for success, you give them the resources to be able to have the experience, but then you can't end there. You've got to follow it up with the unpacking, what did you learn from that? What can you do now that you couldn't do before? How are you going to approach challenges differently? Where else can we use this wisdom? Unpacking that is where it really becomes useful. What was the expression that you used? Potential versus activated knowledge. That's where it becomes activated.
I also love the question, who do you know that would have approached that totally differently? And it gets the person to think Julie would have, or someone, and how would she have approached it? And what little piece might you take from her way of approaching it? Because I don't think we think of who would have answered that better than me or done it differently.
Great insight. Let's, in our final segment, want to just unpack that, how to develop someone remotely, virtually, because I love that in the new edition. Developing at a distance is new to this day and age. You give some great insights, out of sight, but on your mind. Like you say, Julie, you have to be more intentional and deliberate and purposeful in those conversations so that their development of those remote employees remains on your radar screen.
Absolutely. And as a leader who we know is time starved, that's not easy. And so there are, structures and things that we can put in place to ensure that folks don't drop off our radar screen. I mean, things like having just a roster of everybody on your team where you check off, okay, I talked to him today. I talked to her. Oh, okay, I didn't talk to them today. Something's going on. I need to be intentional and to do that. Things like dedicating the first 5 minutes of your one-on-ones. You're going to do a one-on-one anyway. Most of the time, it's occupied with the operational details and the tasks and the milestones and all of that. What if you just started with 5 minutes of development? A couple of those hindsight, foresight, insight questions totally change the energy of the rest of that meeting, but it makes sure that people are reflecting on their development, and it sends a powerful signal about you as a leader and your commitment to their growth, whether they're co-located or scattered to the four corners.
And really orchestrating what's not organic. Love that concept because when you're in one location, when people are back to work, development happens more organically and effortlessly. New employees absorb the culture as if by osmosis. A hallway encounter can offer insight into what an employee might need in any given moment. Lessons are freely available just for people to observe, but not the case with virtual employees. So, how do you orchestrate those experiences to happen when they're not organic because they're not in the workplace?
And maybe it's asking simple questions like of someone who's remote, what's one thing you did today that I would never know that you felt good about? Now, that's a simple question. And I love adding that I would never know. And then all of a sudden, there's a little crack in the facade or whatever.
Yeah, and the part about "I would never know" is really important because, we think about the employee doesn't have a visibility about of what's going on in the organization, but the leader doesn't have visibility around everything that the employee is doing. And so helping them, the employee, to bring voice to some of that stuff is really important. But it's equally important for the leader to orchestrate what's not organic by first kind of stepping back and looking at what is invisible to me around here. What am I just picking up on unconsciously that others aren't going to see? And so small things like what's going on in a meeting when two people are looking at each other, there's a smirk, or you ask the question, okay, well, who's going to take on this action item? And nobody raises their hand, and you see some elbowing. Somebody who's not there doesn't see that. You probably don't think too much about it. You sort it away, you figure out what the dynamics are. But then after that meeting, to have the conversation. So there were a few things going on in the background, remote employee, that you might not have seen. The little tension between these departments. I'm noticing some reluctance on this group to step up because of maybe this. So it's just adding voice, almost narrating some of the invisible stuff that we get to just pick up on so effortlessly when we're co-located.
Absolutely. And really having these conversations doesn't require sweeping initiatives. It requires simple but consistent actions that over time form a powerful development habit if you keep at it. And just to kind of drive this point home, these are conversations that organizations need and employees still want.
Right. And we put still in italics on this edition because we keep hearing it over and over and over. And anyone who does any kind of a survey, career development comes up high. So we ain't done it right yet.
They
I
definitely
love
still
that.
want it. I think they crave it, though. Maybe we should have retitled it a little differently because I think it's beyond a want. I think it's a demand, and it's a deep, deep need that people are bringing to the workplace to grow.
Well, thank you so much, Bev and Julie, for joining me. Remind our listeners when they can get the book and talk to us a little bit about this coach bot that's going to support them as they read the book and get it hopefully to be a more actionable framework that they can use right away.
So we are super excited. The third edition of Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go comes out on September 24th and can be found at all of your favorite booksellers. And we have, of course, the Kindle version. We just learned that there'll be an audio version also available. And one of the things we're super excited about is with this edition, we've created what we refer to as the BookBot, which is an AI supported tool that readers, leaders can use. Because as we were talking about, it's one thing to get a great idea from a book, and it's another thing to actually put into practice. And so, how do we bridge that knowing doing gap? We do it by helping people feel confident about how they can do this and they can do it well. And so the BookBot is a place where folks can go, they can type in some information. I got to talk to Charles about his career, and here's a little bit about who Charles is and what I know about him and past conversations we've had. And the BookBot will help to organize and plan that conversation with a series of questions. It'll be a great roadmap. You can then go on and say, okay, I'm a little nervous about this. I'd like to practice. You play the role of Charles and I'll be me. And you can actually rehearse and then get some feedback on your approach. You can assess your skills, your approaches to development. You can brainstorm development activities with the BookBot. So it's a great resource for being able to bridge that gap and build the confidence and have kind of, Bev and Julie in your hip pocket when you get ready to go put some of these ideas into practice.
I love that. I will definitely be using that. I think that's going to be just a whole change in approach to books moving forward. And it's such a great approach to bridge that knowing and doing gap, which hopefully all of you have read tons of books, but I'm sure there's a lot of them that you've quickly forgotten. And this is a great way to amplify the impact. Remind our listeners too how they can get in contact with both of you and learn more about your work.
We have a book website, and it is the title of the book, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. Julie, did I say that correctly?
It's the title of the book, Help Them Grow, with dashes between the words, but I'm sure you'll put them in the
Dashes.
show notes.
That's what I keep forgetting, dashes. And we are going to put an array of great resources right on that site that people can get for free. Free. And we hope it'll get a lot of use.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.